Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to TechGig webinar series, our endeavor to impart techies. We believe that sharing of knowledge is the key to enhance our skills and grow us as professionals. With this principle in mind, we have initiated a series of webinars conducted by industry experts to give you all a crisp insight of various domains. The topic of today's session is Consultant's View on Network Security, and this is the fourth session in the IT security series that we have going on TechGig. Our guest speaker today is Mr. Akshay Kalkura, Assistant Manager at KPMG. Akshay has over 13 years of experience in the areas related to networks, security, data centers, VoIP, and information security. He is currently associated with KPMG and has reviewed and designed network architectures for several clients in various industries such as telecom, FMCG, software, manufacturing, and financial services, etc. His experience comprises of engagements related to global network transformation, IPv6, SCADA, telecom security, data center design review, ITIS audits, and testing of Cisco ISR products. He has conducted several trainings related to network, routing protocols, units, etc. He strongly believes in best way to gain knowledge is by sharing knowledge. So without further delay, I introduce you all to our guest speaker. Over to you, Mr. Akshay.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Mohini, for that introduction. And a special thanks to TechGig for enabling this collaboration and bringing all the techie community together. So thanks for that. And dear friends, a very good afternoon to all of you. And thanks a bunch for attending this session on a Friday afternoon. I know it's kind of tough after probably a heavy meal, or it might be a holiday for some of you since today being a Good Friday. So hats off to all of you. So today's topic is on consultants' view on network security. I'll just move on to the next slide. Okay, this is just to say that I'm doing this on a personal capacity, and KPMG is not associated in any way with information or data being presented or discussed during this particular session. So primarily, since my experience comprises of working with internet service provider, managed service provider, and my association with Cisco as well for about 5 years. And then during my stint in KPMG, I've worked with various clients, seen various network infrastructure. So based on all this, I put across few things which might be suitable for this particular audience. So coming to the next slide, which is on agenda. So what I realized was the people who are attending this webinar are ranging from freshers to network administrators to security administrators to program managers. Hence, I've kind of structured this to suit everyone's needs, hopefully. And my PPT is just about 10 to 12 slides. So I think you must be happy so that it doesn't put you off to sleep. But I hope at the end of the session, there will be definitely some kind of takeaway for each one of you. So the agenda is going to be like this. So my first slide is going to be on sample network architecture, where I'll be touching upon the architecture covering LAN, WAN, security, and voice over IP. And second will be on network design consideration. Then I'll be touching upon network operations. What are the key elements in ensuring the maintenance or the operations of a network? Then this is something which is very interesting for me. So it's the power of people, process, and technology. So I will be talking about that as well. And then this is a slide on sample network security products. And the last one is going to be on some useful links where you can get good information and keep yourself updated all the time. So let's move on to the next slide, which is the first slide. So this is on the sample network architecture. So like I mentioned, I would be covering the LAN, WAN, security, voice over IP, both from architecture, security, and even from audit perspective. because I know many of you would be facing audits from other consultants who come and take a look at your network and see what is right, what is wrong, are there any security holes in your network. So I'll be talking about that as well in this particular slide. So here the scenario, I mean, the way I've designed this particular diagram, I mean, this is not an ideal network. This is only to show what are the different components a particular network might have. So it is like connecting a couple of buildings and then having internet, WAN, etc. So please don't assume that this is the most ideal architecture, etc. That is not the case. So coming to the end user perspective. So the end user perspective, you can connect either from laptops or from desktops, or there are also wireless users using laptops or even mobile devices. So essentially, on the wired network, you will have your connectivity to the switches. So the connection is via Cat6 cable or Cat5 cable, but at the moment Cat6a is kind of latest because it supports 10 gigabit. And you might have seen in your organizations that these switches might probably be housed in a room called hub room or something like that. So you can have a single switch or multiple switches. So that depends entirely on the number of users in that particular floor or in that particular building. So if there are about 100 users, you might have a couple of 248 port switch or 348 port switch, and accordingly it will be stacked. And from wireless point of view, you will have an access point or wireless routers which are placed at key locations in your office premise. So it will probably be mounted on the ceiling, and this is to enable mobility for users who are having laptop when they move from their desk to the meeting room or vice versa in different locations of your office premises. So these switches are typically known as access switches because they connect directly to your endpoints. Okay, the next part is on core switches. So typically the architecture in a LAN comprises of core, distribution, and access. So the core is like the heart of your the LAN environment, the core switches. So all the traffic aggregates and comes towards the core. And after core, it goes to the firewall and internet router or WAN and then goes out. So in this particular scenario, if you can see that there is also a building B. So here the representation is that, I mean, the idea is if there are two buildings and if they need to communicate with each other, so in building B, you might probably have distribution switches and also access switches which ultimately connect to the endpoint. The connectivity between these two buildings will be typically on fiber. The reason being the connection might be beyond 100 meters, for which your regular Cat6 will not work. So you will use a fiber which is like a multi-mode fiber because single mode is more expensive and it covers much larger distances. And all the traffic comes and connects to the core switches. So this is from a LAN perspective. So next I'm just jumping to the internet part. So if you can see, I mean, there are two routers and then two connections to the internet. The reason being why it is why I've shown two connections is one is redundancy, which is very important. So if one router fails, the other router will take over. And even from internet links, it is advisable to have from a different service provider. So in case one service provider's network fails, the other service provider's network will still be available, and there will not be any issues with respect to availability. So hence it is recommended to have internet links from multiple service providers. And next I'm talking about WAN. So WAN links are, say for example, you have site A. If you see on the left hand side of the slide, you can see site A. So if site A wants to talk to site B, which is remotely located in a geographically different location, so the way you can communicate with both these sites is either via having a dedicated point-to-point link, which is known as leased lines, or you can probably have MPLS links between these two sites. So the advantage of MPLS, which is becoming very popular or it's already popular, is you're using the infrastructure of the service provider. So this way, I mean, the lead time to get the links is very fast, and even the bandwidth, etc., you want to increase, I mean, it is very fast compared to a traditional lease line connectivity. And in the event, again, why you need two links is if one link fails, the other one takes over. So this again depends on the business requirements. So if your business is very critical that your connectivity to both these sites is critical, then you can probably go for two MPLS lines or two dedicated lines. If not, you can use alternate methods of backup such as ISDN, but ISDN I think it's popular in India, or a traditional lease line as a backup. Okay. Next, I'm introducing the firewall in this picture. So if you can see the red arrow from the router to site B, the reason I put that is in the event your WAN links between site A and site B fail, or even the backup link also fails, the other method of communication between these two sites is via having a site-to-site VPN configured using the internet connection. So this is also a very secure way of connecting both the sites. But again, I mean, through the VPN, there might be some latency. So the performance may not be as similar as using a dedicated line or an MPLS link. So typically, I mean, this is used for as a backup, but in some cases where a third party needs to connect to your network, you will probably have dedicated VPN tunnels to each of your companies or your clients or your contractors, etc. So any third party company. And on the left hand side, if you can see the arrow which shows teleworker connecting via VPN, yeah, this is another method of connecting from home or hotel or airport, where a user can log in anywhere into the corporate network using the remote VPN capabilities of your network. And again, I mean, the firewall, the reason why I've shown a couple of firewalls is if one firewall fails, the other one can take over. So you can configure like active or active standby. So it depends. And also if you see the optional firewall in the WAN link, that again depends. So if you're connecting, if site A and site B are of the same company, then you can probably trust site B. But in the event site B is a third party company, then probably a firewall will definitely help, because you wouldn't want any other traffic apart from what is expected to connect to your corporate network. Okay, and again, once again, I want to reiterate that just having two firewalls in your network may not serve the purpose. For example, in a banking network, you might have 3 layers of firewall, and each firewall may be from a different vendor, to ensure that if one firewall does not detect any kind of attack, the other one can probably detect and then allow only the specific traffic to flow into the network. So, and you might also have firewalls specifically for applications as well. And coming to this DMZ, what you see, so DMZ plays a key role. I mean, most of the networks in many organizations will have a DMZ. So DMZ stands for Demilitarized Zone. The reason why you need to have a DMZ is where you can host your servers, which has to be accessible by the internet. So servers such as mail server, DNS, FTP, or any other kind of server which needs to be accessed by internet is located in the DMZ. One of the prime reason for this is, if in case one of the servers is compromised by a hacker, he will not be able to compromise the other servers in the internal network, because the other option could have been that this particular server could have been inside the network and NAT could have been configured on the firewall or on the router. But the problem is, if the server is compromised and it is placed in the inside network, then the other networks are also in a danger of being compromised by the hacker. So that's the reason why you have a DMZs in the network. And you can also configure multiple DMZs in the network. Okay, I've just if you see below the firewall, I've just put 2 IPS there. So, but again, the IPS can be positioned anywhere in the network. It can be positioned in the DMZ or between the firewall router or between the core switch and firewall. So it depends on where you want the packets to be monitored and ensure there is no attacks happening. So IPS typically, I mean, it stands for Intrusion Prevention System. So it can be configured for inline. So the advantage of configuring it for inline is if it detects any attack, it can block that particular IP address or etc. from performing any other attacks in future. Or even the firewall rule also can be updated using this particular IPS. Okay, the next one, if you see near the core switches, there's a server farm. So the server farms are typically connected to the core switch, and the servers can comprise of syslog server, storage area network, backup, proxy servers, etc. So any kind of servers which is typically used by the internal network are located here. So again, I mean, you can protect your server farm by having a separate firewall, or the switches, the core switches also have the capability of having a firewall module included in them. So you can probably purchase a firewall module, insert it in the core switch, and ensure that all traffic to the server farm passes through the firewall. And in terms of application, database, etc., so you have something called 3-tier architecture, where many of the companies, I mean, typically ask for it. The reason being, you will have a firewall between external network and the web interface. Between web interface and application, you'll have another firewall, and between application and database, you'll have another firewall. So that's the reason why you call it as 3-tier architecture. So again, it all depends on what the business needs and on the business requirements. So accordingly, you'll have to design your network. Okay. The next element is what I've shown here is I've introduced an IP phone into the network. So where the IP phone is connected to the LAN, and over here I'm taking Cisco as an example. So the IP phone typically gets registered to the call manager. So the call manager is the heart of the voice over IP network. So it has information related to the numbers of each of the IP phones in the network and the call routing details as well, where if you want to dial any particular number, it will go to the call manager, and then the call manager will route your call accordingly, either over the WAN or within the LAN, etc. So IP phones also play a critical, it's a critical component in the network, and there are security issues related to them as well, which I will touch upon in a few minutes. Okay, so this is typically from the architecture point of view. So where I've tried to cover the various components on LAN, WAN, security, internet, etc. So now I'm going to touch upon each of the elements from security point of view. So coming to the user part, the end user part, so you can also have technologies such as NAC, which is Network Admission Control. So where you can restrict access to your LAN only to specific machines on specific MAC addresses. So that is one of the methods of NAC. The other methods are you can have certificates, or based on the posture of your endpoint, you can decide whether that endpoint can connect to the network or not. For example, if the antivirus is not updated, or if the patches are not updated on the end user, you can probably quarantine it and ensure it is updated, and only then allow that to connect to the network. So this way, you're allowing only authorized end users to connect to the network and ensure the network is not affected by an unauthorized end user connecting to the network. The other thing is on endpoint security. So endpoint security plays a key role. So endpoint security is related to the firewall, the antivirus, anti-malware, etc. So all sorts of things which protect your endpoint from any malicious viruses or trojans or worms, etc. And the third element is on DLP. DLP is data leakage prevention. So this again depends on the kind of business you run. So assuming the end users work on very confidential information or financial information or company proprietary information, and the company needs to ensure that this data is not taken out by the employee either through USB drive or either by sending a mail through Gmail or anything, I mean, to the external world. So the way DLP works is you will have a software on the endpoint, as well as you will have DLP even on the network side, I mean, before it goes to the internet. So basically it will monitor, so based on keywords, etc., it can be configured. So if you try to send out any confidential information, the DLP will be able to pick it up. Either you can stop that from being transmitted or allow transmission and then inform the administrator so that appropriate action can be taken upon that employee. Because what is happening is most of the cases there is a lot of information everywhere and there are high chances of the information being leaked or taken out by the end users. So that's why it's very critical. And desktop security, when I talk about desktop security, it's primarily on what are the kind of settings which are there on the desktop. Like for example, unnecessary services can be disabled or ensure it is up to date, and kind of ensure it only the needed services or required things are configured on the end user laptop or workstations. And also like things like logging, audit logging, etc. can be configured as part of desktop security. Okay, coming to the next part, I mean, here typically you're talking about server security, OS security, database security. So these also play, I mean, key role as part of the security. I mean, every organization who wants to secure the data, etc., need to ensure that they adhere to some controls or some kind of standard which ensures that the servers are secure. So even for if to prevent any attacks happening on the host systems, you can also include a host-based IDS, intrusion detection system, so which typically, I mean, sends an alert when there are any unauthorized or malicious attacks being happening on the servers. Okay. Okay, this particular piece, I mean, it talks about various ways you can secure your various components in the network. So from security perspective, it is important you secure your wireless router, your switches, the switches also have to be secure, then your voice over IP has to be secure, IPS, firewall security, etc., internet router security, anything, I mean, any network component in the network has to be secured. When I mean secured, it's mostly from configuration perspective. For example, for wireless router, so wireless router, you can allow only specific MAC addresses to connect to the access point, and also you can also not broadcast the SSID, session IDs. This is to allow anyone to know what wireless network is available, and they may probably try connecting to it. So it is advisable to disable broadcasting of SSID, and authentication is another key aspect of wireless router. And yeah, logging of course is required to detect any malicious activities. And encryption also plays a key role. So WPA2 is the most preferred encryption with respect to wireless, and it is not at all advisable to use WEP because it can be easily sniffed and broken, and any traffic which is passing on the wireless using WEP can be sniffed easily. So it is not advisable to use WEP at all. And coming to switches and router, so typical things what you can configure is restrict the access to these devices from specific management stations, and do not allow access to this from anywhere in the network. For example, if I'm an employee and sitting on the LAN,
I should not even be able to telnet or SSH. I mean, SSH is preferred over telnet because it's encrypted. I should not even get a prompt when I do a SSH on the switch or on the router. It should be restricted only to specific management stations in the network. Then even from users' point of view, for example, if it's a huge network and you have multiple administrators, it is recommended to have AAA. AAA stands for authentication, authorization, and accounting. And probably you can have TACACS or something configured in a network so that each user will have a specific privilege level based on his role. For example, only if it's a service desk and he wants to run only few commands and check the status of the router, etc., then he should be assigned a privilege level which meets those requirements. And for an administrator, it can be of a higher privilege. So the reason why AAA is important is also allows accounting. At the end of the day, I mean, if you want to go back to your logs and see who performed what and what day, this will definitely going to help. And things like SNMP is also quite critical. Nowadays, SNMP v3 is more popular because it is authentication based and it is more secure than SNMP v2. And yeah, and in SNMP v2, if you are still using, avoid using the default community strings and try to make it more complex as per your password policy, like 8 characters and complex characters, etc., mix of alpha, numeric, etc. So that is quite critical. And yeah, and probably you can also disable some of the unwanted services on these devices, because things like vendors like Cisco and all have a bunch of services which are enabled by default. So you may probably need to run a tool and figure out which services are not required and probably disable them to make it more secure. And another key aspect of all these devices is also logging. Logging is very critical, and you should, depending again on the business requirement, you should, I mean, have a syslog server or some kind of logging mechanism like an SIEM tool where you can send all the logs to a central location, configure it to be monitored, and send alerts for any critical events either via email or SMS. And logging always helps in the case of any event or any incident. You can always go back to the logs and see what has happened, who has done from which IP address, etc. So for this kind of investigation purpose, you also need to ensure the timestamps are common across all these devices. So NTP, which is Network Time Protocol, plays a very important role in this. So for example, if your switch is configured for a different timestamp and your router is on a different timestamp, then correlation of all these events becomes very tough. And if you're performing an investigation or forensic kind of thing, it is not going to help at all. So ensure all the devices, servers, etc. are pointing to an NTP server and have a common timestamp across. And with respect to IPS security, I mean, just ensure that unwanted, I mean, for example, there might be 4 interfaces out of which you're using only 2. The remaining 2 can be disabled, etc. And just ensure the signatures are up to date on this IPS. And from firewall perspective, I mean, the best thing is by default it should be a deny all, and you should allow only traffic what is intended to go out or come inside. And again, the configurations have to be reviewed on a periodic basis to ensure that it meets the current requirements. So in many cases, what happens, you might configure a rule for some particular reason, but then you might forget to remove it from the firewall, and it will be lying there in the firewall. So that particular rule can be misused by a hacker or a malicious user. So it is important to review the configuration files on a periodic basis. And coming to the routers which are facing the internet, they are again prone to a lot of DOS attacks. So you need to ensure that you have configurations which prevent DOS attacks from the internet, and also IP spoofing. IP spoofing is another important thing. So external networks will try to pretend that you're from internal and then try to get access. So you should have configurations which prevent IP spoofing as well. Coming to voice over IP. So voice over IP again is becoming very popular in terms of security issues. The reason being The kinds of attacks you can face on a voice over IP are, now people can sniff the voice. I mean, they can try to see what a person user a person A is talking to person B. You can easily sniff if it is not encrypted. And there are also methods where you can modify the communication. So user A tells something to user B, you can tap that conversation, modify it, and send it to user B. So user B might hear something entirely different from what user A actually said. So these kind of things are becoming very common nowadays. And there are things like toll frauds, where people can get into the network and make international calls from your network without even anyone knowing it, unless you get a bill at the end of the month and you realize there are a bunch of unauthorized calls. So which has a major impact on the organization in terms of legality, in terms of financial implications. So it is important, I mean, to configure your voice network to ensure that only the users can dial specific numbers, and also, if possible, to configure secure communications of voice over IP, because by default it works on RTP, real-time transport protocol. However, you can also configure something called secure RTP, so where your transmission is encrypted and you can prevent malicious user from sniffing your packets. So even there are cases where mailboxes, the voice mailboxes have been hacked and people have retrieved information from that. So from voice perspective, just ensure that everything is configured properly and again reviewed, and try to avoid direct connectivity between PSTN and IP network. In India, it is not legal to connect PSTN directly to IP. I'm not sure about other countries though. So even from legality perspective, it will be an issue if you connect PSTN to IP. But from yeah, so just ensure that these things are taken into consideration while configuring a voice or IP network. So that's all I have from this particular slide. So I hope it was quite informative so far, so you can have your questions noted down, and probably towards the end of the session you can ask. I mean, I'll try my best to answer your questions, but just in case I cannot, you can always drop me a note to the email ID which is shown at the bottom of the slide, and I will definitely, I mean, check and get back to you, because again, I'm not an expert in this field. Okay, the next slide is on network design considerations. So what do we have here? The first one is on availability. Okay, you might have seen availability. Everybody wants 99.9999% everywhere, and availability is a key thing. The reason being, if something goes down, it is going to affect your business as well. So there is a lot of financial implications, and also reputation is at stake when your server is not available or your network is not available, etc. So it is important to have to take into consideration availability. And when I talk about availability, it comprises various things. For example, power supply. Your devices should have dual power supply options, and even you should have dual UPSs or dual generators, etc. This is from power supply perspective. And even from routing of cables from your service providers to your router, it should be diversified. I mean, you should not have both the cables coming together, etc. The reason being, in the event of a fire or anything, then if both the cables are affected, then availability will be an issue. So it is always advisable to have diversified routing of cables, even from service provider to the building and within the building as well. And it is important to take care of hygiene factor as well. I mean, just ensure that your cables are not prone to lot of dust, and it should not be open and accessible to anybody. It should be concealed and free from rodents, from water leakage, So typically in data center, I mean, you might see rodent repellent or water leakage detection in the data center below the raised flooring. So this is to ensure that the cables are not cut, etc. And physical security also plays a key role on for availability. So for example, you have a server room or a data center, and if you don't have proper access control, so anybody can go inside, pull out the cable, or do something malicious and then come out without anyone, I mean, detecting it. So things like physical security and how you keep your equipments in the rack, ensure your rack doors are closed, etc., and ensure your cables are properly marked and labeled, and it should be in a neat fashion. So it's easy for troubleshooting as well, and even from availability perspective. So availability plays a key role. The next is on capacity. Okay, I can see a huge burger there. I'm kind of hungry at the moment because it's still lunch time for me out here in Dubai. Yeah, so capacity is again a key component. The reason being, when you're sizing your network, say you're having a new network setup, and you need to know what is your current capacity in terms of number of users, what is the kind of bandwidth you require, what is the kind of usage which will be there on those devices. So accordingly, you need to size your network. So for example, if I take Cisco, you have Cisco 1800, 2900, 2800, 3800 routers. So depending on your capacity and future requirements, you need to ensure that you buy the right product. Otherwise, there will definitely be issues related to performance later on. Coming to redundancy, okay, the reason why I put this particular picture is it has Pizza Hut and it also says we have pizza, which is like redundant information. But I think many of you will already be aware of redundancy since I've spoken about it in the last slide. So the reason for redundancy is if one thing fails, the other one can take over. So if one firewall fails, other one can take over. If one router fails, other one can take over. If one switch fails, other one can take over. So it is very important from availability perspective also that you have multiple devices in place and multiple links in place. So once again, I would like to reiterate the fact that this totally depends on the business requirement. If your business is not critical, and you can probably survive with a single device, I mean, otherwise there will be a lot of financial implications in procuring one more device, maintaining it, etc. So a lot of things depends on what the business requirements are. So the key thing to remember is the technical requirements should be aligned with the business requirements. The second, I mean, the other thing is on security. Security is a very key aspect in your network design consideration. So one of the three principles of security is confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So when you say confidentiality, it talks about how secure you can keep your data. If how it should not be accessible to anybody. I mean, that is what confidentiality talks about. How can you ensure that your data is secure within your network? So like I mentioned, you can have your data stored in your databases, and that can be encrypted so that anyone who's having access to the database may not even be able to read the contents of the database because it is already encrypted. Or for example, if you're transmitting something from point A to point B, and if it is through IPsec tunnels, etc., even that kind of transmission cannot be sniffed. So confidentiality is taken care. And the other thing is integrity. When I say integrity, it means the contents of a particular data. So you need to ensure that, okay, the data is available, it is confidential, but how do you ensure that the data cannot be changed? So you can have things like IDS, etc., which shows that in the event of any change in the files, the alert will be sent, etc. So integrity also plays a key role, and availability is something which I've already spoken about. So availability also plays a key role as part of security as well. So the three main things about security is CIA, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Coming to performance. So when I say performance, yeah, so once you have set your network or you're setting up your network, so you need to ensure that it has the right kind of performance. So definitely some kind of test is required before you make anything go live. For example, you have internet links, you have WAN links, you have LAN. Ensure you run adequate tests to ensure that you're getting the required performance out of it. There should not be any errors, any packet drops, or any latency related issues. Everything has to be taken into consideration while setting up a network. Okay, scalability. I like this particular picture because the number of people on this particular train, typically somewhere in India, you can see these kind of things happening. Yeah, scalability is again very important. The reason being, you buy a particular product now and tomorrow you know that, okay, your number of users in your company has doubled and your current product is not able to meet that kind of traffic. So you should not be in a position where you have to discard that equipment and buy a totally new one. So this will have a lot of issues related to getting an approval from your management, and it has financial implications, etc. So it is important to ensure that while you are procuring something, the device should be scalable or it should be modular in nature, so that tomorrow if you need any new service or any additional things to be included, you can always buy a separate module and insert it in your existing equipment. So that is very important. And the other criteria is it should meet future requirements with minimal investment. So that is the whole idea of scalability. So I am done with network design considerations. I'll just move on to network operations key elements. Okay, I just picked up the slide related to ITIL, but I am not really going to talk about what ITIL is about, etc. I am just going to touch upon why process is required, or from operations perspective, why are some of the elements critical. For example, change management. If I take change management as an example, the reason why it is important that any changes to your network, to your devices, firewalls, etc. has to be authorized. Unauthorized changes should not happen at all at any cost. So the reason why you have change management process, there is a process. So engineer raises a ticket, the ticket gets viewed by the manager, managers looks at the implications and if there are any rollback options, and then approves it, and then the configuration is made, etc. So this helps in ensuring that unauthorized configuration changes are not made to your network, and even from audit perspective, this plays a very critical role. And configuration management is also critical. The reason being, you'll have all your configurations, your inventory, etc. And inventory management also plays a very critical role in the security of a network, because you need to know what are the elements in your network which is currently there, what has been taken out, or what has been included. So inventory also plays a key role. And other things like service level management. Yeah, service level also plays a very important role. So you have your SLAs, etc. defined even for your end users. For example, when you log a call, your response time would be so many hours, your resolution time will be so many hours. So this way you can track, or you can give better services to your end users or even clients. So service level management plays a very key role in network operations. And things like incident management, yeah, incident management is also important from security perspective. So any incident happening, it has to be logged and appropriate action has to be taken. And if these incidents keep happening, same kind of incidents happen continuously, then it becomes part of problem management. So where you do a root cause analysis and try to find a solution which will fix that issue forever. And the other key thing with network operations is management and monitoring. Monitoring as well. Monitoring plays a very key role. So you need to ensure you have proper network management systems in your network, which can monitor the health of your devices in terms of performance, in terms of availability, in terms of any security events happening on these devices, etc. So NMS plays a very critical role with respect to network operations. So yeah, I mean, I'm not going to talk about each and every element in this, but I just want to ensure that operations also play a very key role in what you need to do, and ITIL is one of the things which help in ensuring the operations are going smoothly. And also there is a scope always for improvement, so you have continuous service process improvement as well included as part of ITIL, which is very critical. So we cannot configure everything and assume everything is fine without doing any improvements. So improvement also plays a very critical part of it. Okay. The power of people, process, and technology. So let me people. So the first thing is about people. Why people is a key. Why are people key from security perspective? So the picture I put here is to represent senior management, but I think they don't really look like senior management, but yeah. But yeah, so from senior management, it is important you have a buy-in from senior management for security. I mean, even they should be serious about security of data, transactions, etc. in your network, and you definitely need to ensure you have required support from senior management. They are one of the people who play a key role in ensuring security of your network. The second aspect in my experience is also the security administrator. I mean, you have all the products, fancy products in place, but ultimately if it is not configured based on standards, or if the administrator is overlooking something and misconfiguring it, etc., there are a lot of implications on the network. If not in the short run, it will definitely have an impact in the long run. So some misconfiguration might be compromised by some hacker a couple of years later or a year later. So it is important for the security administrators or network administrator to be smart. They have to be smarter than the hackers. I mean, that is the only way you can protect your network. Just by deploying the products and assuming everything will be fine is definitely not the right way to go. So that's the reason, in my experience, I feel security administrators play a very key role. They have to be smart, and they also need to be trained as well adequately. But again, a lot of things depend on self-motivation and self-reading. So the administrator to keep himself updated on what are the kind of security attacks happening around and ensure that the network is taken care accordingly. Okay. Yeah, the next thing is on the end users, the employees in an organization. How do they play a key role? So you have your senior management buy-in, you have good technology, you have a security administrator who's smart, but at the end of the day, if the employees are revealing information about their passwords, or for example the administrator himself reveals his administrator password to other colleagues, etc., then the whole point of security goes for a toss. So it is important that adequate information security awareness is given to these end users to make them understand the importance of security, the importance of not opening unwanted files or sending out data or getting in data, etc. So information security awareness plays a very key role in the security of the organization. So one of the I'm not sure if you guys have heard about Kevin Mitnick. So Kevin Mitnick's the way he got information was purely on social engineering. So the way he got it is just talking to people and getting the passwords from there, making use of it, or making misuse of it, and that's the reason how he became popular, and he was arrested and I think jailed for a couple of years or so, because he was involved in around 100 odd crimes, including the government also in US. And he says that all his exploits, etc., have been purely on social engineering. So, which shows that how important it is for people to be aware of security. And yeah, so from Kevin Mitnick perspective, I think he has written some 2-3 novels. I have read Art of Deception and Ghost in the Wires. So I think that is pretty good read. So security enthusiasts out there can also probably pick it up and read. Coming to process. So process, again, in my previous slide on ITIL, I've spoken a little bit on this. So why process is important? Okay, assuming your people are good, your technology is good, but if you don't have a proper process in place, then what happens? For example, an administrator leaves the organization and there is no process to remove his ID from the firewall or from the router, etc. There are good chances that that particular person can go out of the organization, log in from outside, and then tamper with the data or with the systems, etc. So it is a very important aspect. Process plays a very important aspect in terms of security. So kindly ensure your processes are in place and there are adequate checkpoints, reviews, or audits in place to ensure that your processes are fine and there are no loopholes at all. So last but not the least, technology. I mean, of course, you have people, you have process, but you have equipments which are like reached end of life or have no support or have a lot of bugs in them which can be exploited. Then there is the other two aspects will simply fail because of your technology not being up to date. But again, it doesn't mean that you just need to buy state-of-the-art equipments for your network. So you need to take a decision whether it is really required for your network, whether it meets your requirements. If not, you can always go for the product which is actually required. So, but however, ensure that your software updates, etc., are up to date and they do not contain any security loopholes which can be exploited by an hacker. Okay, I think I'll run quite quickly now because I think we hardly have any time. So some of the top network security threats, increase in the number of users. There are a bunch of users nowadays. There's so much of information being exchanged, etc. So this might lead to a lot of issues in terms of security. The second thing is mobile proliferation. There are a lot of mobility users in place. So so how do you integrate mobile into your network, etc.? What kind of information it has plays a very key role in terms of security. Then moving forward, everything is going to be on IP, and the two, if IPv6 is going to be introduced, each device will have an IP, and there will be an overdose of IP in your network, and you'll have to ensure it is monitored properly. Virtualization also plays a key role. The reason being, there are so many things which are going virtual. So ultimately, you will not know whether the attack was virtual, the outcome was virtual. God knows what can happen in terms of virtualization. So that also plays a very key role in terms of security. And other things are like you can have DOS attacks, you can focus attacks on a network from outside and from internal users as well. Okay, this particular slide, I think this is just an illustrator. Maybe you can take a look at it later on. I think because the session is going to be recorded, you can always go back and see this is again very illustrative and does not mean these are the best products in the market. You need to ensure, you need to evaluate it meets your requirements and both your business and technical requirements, and only then opt for this any other product mentioned here, or even otherwise any other product which is not mentioned here as well. So please don't assume that these are the best of the breed products. And some of the useful links I have is on the network world, search security. So it is important to keep yourself updated with various things which is happening around you. Otherwise, security just goes for a toss. So what I keep telling is security is not a one-time activity. It is like grooming yourself. If you don't groom yourself on a regular basis, you'll probably stink or you'll probably die. So security is very, very important. So having said this, I'm bringing this session to a closure. So if you have any questions, I would definitely like to take it up. Okay, I can see some. Okay, there's one question by Bhaskar Kumar. He says how to make a DMZ more secure. So DMZ more secure, you just need to ensure that you open the right, only allow the specific IP address and only on a specific port, and also ensure logging is enabled on the firewall and it is pushed to a syslog server or something. I'm sorry, to a utility which will actually capture all the logs and store for future purposes. Okay, there is another question by Rishiraj Singh Gaur. If we had good firewall and antivirus, then it is necessary to use DMZ network to secure our network from hackers? No, I mean this point of DMZ is if you want to host anything which is to be accessed by the internet, only then you needed DMZ. So DMZ does not mean that if you have antivirus, DMZ is not required, etc. So that is not the funda. Okay, I'll move on to the next one by Chandrasekhar Kondaka. Can you again go on for topic IDS? I think we don't have much time, but from IDS perspective, you can place your IDS in different locations in your network. So it is not necessary, as I mentioned, that in my architecture I've shown IPS or IDS between the core switch and the firewall. So depending on the requirement, you can place it accordingly in your network. So you need to analyze your network thoroughly and decide where you want your IDS to be, or where do you feel malicious traffic could happen, or where do you feel that you need to protect key information. The next question is from Ajay Singh, which says, in network in sequence, where this device kept accordingly, firewall and IPS and module require like signatures, etc. So we have basic Juniper firewall, no extra component. Yeah, I think my previous question will probably answer this. So it again depends on your network. So understand your network and decide where you want to position your IPS. Where do you feel it's prone to attack from malicious user, or you can place it where you need confidential data has to be protected, etc. So accordingly, you need to take a decision where your IPS has to be positioned. The next question is from Venkatraman Ganapati Raman. How do you avoid situations such as spam mails entering your network, especially when the very server spam host which blacklists senders of one get pounded with up to 300 GB of data per second, which happened very recently? Yeah, I did read about this particular thing, but somehow I'm not getting what exactly happened with respect to spam host. So I mean, ultimately, if your product itself is getting bombarded with such kind of DOS attacks, I mean, definitely need to relook at what that product can offer, or whether your filters in the perimeter are secure enough to prevent such kind of DOS attacks which can happen on these servers. So having said that, I think there are no more questions. So I'm bringing this session to an end. And once again, thanks a lot for all your participation. Okay, I think there's one more couple of questions. Okay, my question is, why really need transparent firewall? Instead we have a routed firewall. So transparent firewall is typically used in situations where one is shortage of IP address, so you don't have to make any changes in the network, due to which you need to change the IP address of the device, etc. So that's where typically transparent firewall is used. But however, the best recommendation is to go for routed firewall. You configure with the required IP addresses, etc., and ensure it is there. And I have a question from Fateh Ahmed. Can you please let us know some of the most demanding certificate in network security and hacking worldwide? Okay, this is a good question. I think many of them would be keen on knowing this. So in terms of security, you have CCNA security, CCIE security, etc. And from hacking perspective, you can start with CH, although it's not a great, this is again my opinion, but yeah, it's good to start off with. And you have a certificate related to CISA, CISSP, etc. And even something from SANS, you have a certification which will help from security perspective. And the other question is from Satish Kumar, how to configure IPsec tunnel and Cisco router using different key format. I mean, this is something I think which you'll have to take a look and see. I'm not too sure about this particular thing. I can always get back to you, or you can send me a mail on my email ID.
Well, thank you so much for the insightful presentation, Mr. Akshay. I'm really thankful to you for conducting this webinar. It was a great session. I would also like to
Thanks
thank
a lot, Amol.
all our participants for the support in making this webinar a success. The recording of this session would be available on techgeek.com by tomorrow. Thank you all. Have a great evening.
Okay. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.